and welcome to the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. And my guest today on the Jeffrey Eisen podcast is Ann Ruane from Pewaukee, Wisconsin. And she runs a healing practice called Lux Eterna. And I'm sure she'll tell us a bit more about where that name came from. Welcome, Ann, and thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a real treat to be here with you.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you start off by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a healer?
Sure. So when I grew up, I was a very quiet child, kind of blended in with everybody and, was the well-behaved child, the obedient student, and was the chameleon. I was whoever people most needed me to be, and found that my relationships tended to fall in that same category. So then I ended up with no voice, no opinion, a whole lot of sadness, and then there was a divorce under my belt to go with it. And shortly after my divorce, in the summer of 2008, we experienced what I refer to as the Great Flood. We had a series of really intense storms pass through the area, and there were power outages and flooding and a lot of rain. And I ended up with a waist-high pool in the basement of my house. That began my process of really finding my inner strength, my sense of courage, and doing the next best thing for me. I watched as I was removing things from my house and feeling that sadness for the things that I was getting rid of, and came to the place of understanding that they were just things. They didn't define me, didn't define who I was. And in that process of finding that normalcy in my home again, another round of storms passed through, and I was up in the middle of the night, staying on top of the water that started to come back up in my basement. And all of a sudden, the power of my shop vac went out, but my lights were still on. So I went over to the circuit breaker and there were some hot spots. So I flipped off the breakers and called an electrician in the middle of the night. And when he showed up, he said, what brought you to the circuit breaker? What drew you there? And I said, I don't know. It just didn't make sense. And it was one of those, what I refer to as divine love nudges, that took me over there. And he showed me, he said, if you had not flipped off those breakers, he said, you were seconds away from your house going up in flames.
Wow. Electrical
fire. And I was kind of floored at the whole concept. And of course I didn't take it in that moment, because I still had more water coming up in my basement. So I was back to getting that water out. But as the days continued to pass, I started to really realize that my awakening of my spiritual journey happened in that moment. My home really became a metaphor for my body. From the outside, my home seemed normal, like there was no damage, there was no chaos. But on the inside was where the work needed to be done. And I realized that is what I needed to do too, that there was work on the inside that needed to be taken care of. And I even got to the point where, taking into consideration the near electrical fire, from an emotional standpoint, anger is a really hot emotion. And that opened that door for me to say, I really need to pay attention to that anger that has been stored within, so that I don't get consumed by the fire of that emotion. So that opened the door for me to really start on a path of emotional healing, understanding what was going on within, and being less concerned about the external and prioritizing the internal.
Wow. I'm always fascinated at how the universe gets us our messages. Yours is a very metaphorical one. As you talked about hitting, finding the breaker and calling the electrician, what comes to mind is that was a near-death experience. Although it wasn't a typical near-death experience. A few more moments of you not going over to that electrical panel may have put your life in jeopardy. And so I find that if we don't pay attention to the messages, they get stronger and stronger. And obviously, maybe you were missing out on some of the messages that were coming your way, because it sounded like, the messages of the storms and the near electrical fire was pretty intense message. Looking back, can you recall any messages, now that you understand how spirit works, that you didn't pay attention to before that?
Oh, definitely. I would have to say that my first marriage kind of embraced some of that. I had feelings of apprehension stepping into that. Even on the morning of the wedding, I wasn't excited. I didn't have that joy of the experience, and I dismissed it. And I thought, no, this can't be happening. This must just be nerves. And then through the course of my marriage and the unfolding of that story, it was also a pretty intense time for me personally. My dad was sick and fighting his battle against cancer. I was a student going for my master's degree in accompanying and collaborative piano. So I had a full-time load within that, and I was teaching over 75 piano students. And so I just dismissed it. I got in my head and I justified all of those emotions as just being overwhelmed and stressed from everything else that was going on. And so that was message number one. And then during the course of my marriage, that first marriage was only 4 years in length, but a lot unfolded during that time. And I was very nervous to voice concerns about behaviors that I was noticing. And it was, again, I justified it going, no, this can't be true. And so I would bite my tongue and I would hold in all of those emotions, all of the things that I was feeling inside, which later I realized were really critical things for me to step into. And then once the divorce finally came to fruition, again, it was that place of resisting the messages that were coming in terms of being able to find peace with the emotional healing. And I started to answer that nudge when I went for my first Reiki attunements and started to use the tools of Reiki and energy work to unravel the messages within. But it really was in the heart of that first marriage, when I was ignoring all of those feelings and sensations within, that it was as though the third message of the storm was so important. And the reason why I'm stressing the 3 is that is a critical point for me with my own personal work. I take it from the sense of, if I complain about something 3 times, then I either need to act on it and do something, or I need to find a way to come to terms and accept what is going on. And the same thing happens with the messages of 3. I will get 3 messages from spirit, and if I don't act on it, it does. As you said, it gets more intense, and it's spirit's way of saying, are you in there? I'm talking to you. You need to pay attention. That power of 3, very strong.
It's interesting you say that, because I channel Shaltazar, and they are the energy of 33, the master teacher. And of course, part of 33 is 3. And so I'm drawn to the number 3 as well. I think it's important that we look for signs, whether they be in numerology or when they repeat themselves from, the difficult time that you had. It would be great if you could help other people not have to go through the intense issues that you did. And I'm sorry that you had to experience them. What advice would you give to people who are maybe missing out on their signs from the universe, that things aren't necessarily going that well, especially, with the pandemic and COVID-19? I'm sure there are wake-up calls being issued from the universe on a regular basis. If you think Amazon is busy delivering parcels, the universe, I'm sure, is extremely busy delivering wake-up calls. What would your advice be to the listeners?
My biggest piece of advice is to pay attention inward, to pay attention to your emotional state. Had I done that more diligently and vulnerably during my first marriage, I think that would have saved a lot of the turmoil. But at the same time, it was, as you said, really necessary for me to have that experience, because it was all of a sudden this place of fighting for myself. Like that inner fire was all of a sudden lit, and paying attention to how I felt was key to really coming to terms to what it was that I was passionate about, what was important to me. And it wasn't about what other people thought I should be doing, or if I should still be married, or if I should be having kids. It got rid of all of the stereotypes and the expectations and allowed me to find my voice and what fit for me. And in the whole world of the pandemic, it all of a sudden thrust the country into a place of shutdown. And based on what I am sensing from a bigger perspective, as well as what I'm getting from my clients, is that shutdown also happened emotionally. There was grieving that needed to take place for grieving of the familiarity of routine, of life, of going to work, of going to school, of being able to go to a basketball game or a baseball game. And then there was feeling the anger of what it was like to all of a sudden feel restricted, to know that there were boundaries that were placed upon you that may or may not have made sense to you at the time, but touching that anger within. Maybe there was sadness that was there for as part of the grieving, and allowing yourself to feel that sadness, maybe for your regular weekly coffee dates with your best girlfriends, or maybe the connection of being able to watch your kids play with their classmates at school. So the pandemic really invites that place of paying attention to what's going on emotionally. And as a greater cultural norm, feeling our feelings is not high on the priority list. That is not something that we're taught to do. So when we are faced with having to feel, it is very unfamiliar. And so my experience has also led me to create acronyms for the emotions that I don't necessarily like to lean into. Take anger, for example. As I was mentioning before, I made that metaphorical connection to the near electrical fire, to anger that was within that needed attention. And since I grew up in an environment where hot tempers could happen in a flash, anger was something that I really resisted. And so the acronym I created for anger is another new growth experience revealed. If I lean into it that way, it's safer. It feels safer to lean into anger because it's that reminder that there's something there for me to understand.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love the term lean into the feeling. And by the way, you're preaching to the converted. I am a big fan of feeling fully all of our emotions. Sheltazar has taught me an awful lot. And as a man, that was maybe even a more difficult lesson to learn, because we are certainly taught as men in society that feelings and sensitivity is a weakness. So leaning into those feelings, I love the acronym idea. Any way that you can possibly tap in to that truth. Sheltazar says that feelings are truth. And it seems that is what saved you. And I'm really, really happy that you are helping other people realize how important it is to lean into those feelings. Let's go back a little bit further in your personal history. As you said, you grew up, feeling very mousy and trying to blend in. Obviously, those feelings came up early in your life, but as you mentioned, we're not really taught or trained how to accept those feelings. What advice would you give for the young people growing up today, the young children that are feeling those kind of feelings of insecurity and lack of self-confidence?
One of the things that I would offer as a suggestion is to find a safe person, be it another friend that you can talk about your feelings with, or a parent, relative, something something along those lines, so that you know that there is emotional safety, that you have that ability to feel how you feel and know that it doesn't make you a bad person to feel. Feeling anger doesn't make you an angry person or a bad person. It just means in that moment, there is something that was triggered within that hurts so much that needs to be brought to the light. It needs to come into that space of awareness so it no longer becomes a trigger. And if there is the absence of another person to be able to talk to or that feels safe, one thing I did growing up, I journaled. I wrote poems. I just wrote, and it didn't necessarily wasn't to anybody about anything, but it was a safe place to be able to get those ideas and those feelings out of me so that they didn't keep spinning around in my head and that they didn't create that tension and turmoil within my body. So it's just that ability to put pen to paper, and the act of writing was just so cathartic because then it was out of my person, out of my being, and handed to universe, if you will, to be able to take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I always like to recommend for people to find a healthy and appropriate way to express those feelings. And certainly I'm a big journaling fan. That's how I connected with Sheltazar. And, whether it's hitting the pillow or going somewhere where nobody can hear you and yelling as loud as you can, getting that energy out of you is so important. And Again, I'm sorry you had to experience what you did, but I think the world is a better place because you did and you woke up and You're now helping other people. And I think that's fantastic. So I'm hoping that listeners realize that the energy that we're going through now is a wake-up call, and, don't wait for that storm to create a flood or a possible electrical fire. Listen to Ann's heating and start tapping into those unpleasant emotions.
Yes. Well, feeling is healing. The more you feel, the more you heal.
Yeah, I love that one.
There's such
Want to say that one again for everyone?
Sure. Feeling is healing.
Feeling is healing, right? So when we deny some of the lower and slower, the unpleasant feelings, we're really denying healing.
Correct.
Wow. Now that's powerful, eh? I mean, wouldn't it be nice if everybody grew up knowing that feeling is healing?
Yes, it would be incredible.
Right. Well, we're going to start a movement, Ann, you and I. We're going to start the Feeling is Healing movement, right?
Awesome. I'm game. I'm in.
And you can certainly see in this time in human history that we're going through, we're in the midst of not only the pandemic, but some racial tensions. And you can see that is being expressed in a very inappropriate way. It reminds me of the late Debbie Ford and the shadow work that she used to do. What happens when you don't allow that feeling to heal? It festers and can burst forth in inappropriate ways, in ways that are full of violence and other inappropriate behavior. So there's a wake-up call, again, an awareness that if you do not allow the feeling, you do not allow the healing. And if you had a cut on your arm or your knee, I'm sure that most people would want it to heal, and they would put on a Band-Aid and they would put on some antiseptic cream. If you've got an injury on your body, you do something to heal it. And why aren't we doing that with our emotions? Because that's just a different aspect of the wholeness that we are.
Yes. Well, and even going back to what you were just saying about the shadow, that is in line with where the name of my healing work came from. So Lux Eterna is Latin for light eternal. So it's light eternal healing. And as I was saying before too, when we tap into those feelings, we're bringing what is within, or what is in the shadow, what is in the dark. We're bringing it to the light so it can be seen and accepted. There's so much resistance to the feeling. And if we allow ourselves, if we give ourselves permission to feel how we feel, that brings in that space of light. And we are all beings of light. And so the name of my business, my healing work, Lux Eterna Healing, light eternal healing. Let the light shine. Let what creates your you be undeniably true to you, regardless of if you're feeling sad, mad, glad, hurt, ashamed, afraid. it doesn't matter. What matters is that you acknowledge what you are sensing inside because it's real to you. And that is a moment of growth and expansion for you.
Yes, absolutely. Schultezar teaches that feelings are truth. And those lower and slower unpleasant feelings you refer to are no less a truth than the joy and bliss and happiness. And, we tend not to have a problem feeling the happiness
Right.
and allowing the healing, because to a certain degree, happiness is healing because it's allowing that light to beam through us. So we accept the healing of happiness, but often we do not accept the healing of anger and frustration and depression. So I see we are speaking the same language, and I hope the listeners are paying attention to what we're saying, because certainly in this period of heightened emotions, we need the healing. We need the healing. So let the feelings do the healing, right?
Right. And, and a visual that I like to use with that too is the yin and yang symbol. It's a perfect symbol in the sense because within the light, there is still dark, and within the dark, there is still light. So you never have one without the other, but they influence each other. We wouldn't know that space of joy if we didn't know that sadness. We wouldn't know that experience of freedom if we didn't know isolation. So it's important to embrace the totality and see that as a universal whole that is constantly moving and spinning, but always united, always influencing each other.
Part of the whole. Yeah. Schultezar has taught me a lot about the duality and how it is in contrast to the unity. And I believe to a certain degree, part of our human purpose is to unite that duality, to find the light and the dark and to weave it into the oneness that we are. And so it is important to accept your shadow and your lower and slower feelings, just like it is important to accept your light and your higher and faster feelings. So yeah, wow, great stuff. And tell the listeners a bit about how your life has changed, because it certainly doesn't seem that you're very mousy now and that you're trying to blend in and say the things that other people want you to hear. You seem to be speaking your truth. And of course, your truth, just like mine, is different than a lot of people. How has your life changed with this work that you have been doing on yourself and the work that you do for others?
Well, it has been such a blessing to have had the experience that I did have, because through the course of the Reiki 1 and 2 attunements prior to the Great Flood, I was able to continue to use that. And then I was getting the love nudges. You need to do this for other people. And my initial response was like, what? No way. I have way too much work to do, to be able to help other people. And then the response came back and said, that's exactly why you are the perfect person. That opened the door to doing the Reiki master work. And then I was introduced to a phenomenal crystal healer, Diane Bloom, and I immersed myself in taking classes with her and learning about the crystals and how to use them in the healing process. And then I went to school for the energy work, and it continues to evolve. I continue to do my work. I continue to go within. And what I absolutely love about the work I do with my clients is that I can create that space of emotional safety, to create that ability for the vulnerable expression of what is within, and then use my skills within the energy work, within the crystal healing, the ability to intuitively channel with their guides and my guides to help foster that place of emotional healing, to align mind, body, spirit through the releases of those energy blocks, because emotions are energy in motion. And when we do our best to stop them, we learned from Newton, an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Well, our mind can be that force to stop the emotions from having the ability to move. So the combination of creating that space of emotional safety and vulnerability with allowing the energy to be released creates a very safe space of exploration and acceptance, opening to that place of self-love and worthiness, knowing that it's safe to be who they are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
A real powerful gift to be able to walk with people as they explore that place of safety, knowing that I can walk with them.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's like everything I believe in, and you're just articulating it in such a beautiful and loving and kind way. So thank you for that. It's like you're translating everything that comes that is within me, and I love it. And it's so amazing to find another kindred spirit. And I love what you say about finding that support and finding someone that you can be vulnerable and open up to. And that's why coaches, healers are playing a very, very important role in society today, because they are that friendly energy that we need to open up. Because if we don't open up, we will keep it within and deny ourselves from the healing, and our hurts will continue to fester. And so that's really fantastic that you are that person to hold the space and allow people to be vulnerable. Let me ask you a question. Has your spirituality helped you in your journey, and what would you recommend to the listeners in terms of spiritual beliefs being applied in a practical way?
That's a great question. So my spirituality continues to inform me every single day. My mornings start with journaling. So I check in with myself, and that's also channeling also happens at that time. If I pose questions, that's also a very powerful place for me to get answers. And I do check in through the course of the day. When I find myself getting nervous, or maybe I'm getting antsy or overwhelmed, it's that reminder of the breath, and that to pause and take a deep breath is taking spirit in. It's taking in all around you, taking it in and going, okay, interrupt the monkey chatter upstairs in your head, and just come back to your heart, and let your heart be your leader and not your head. So that is an important part of my daily work, and tapping into my creativity, be it working with clients or creating daily posts or writing a blog or playing piano. All of those foster that connection to my creativity, which is at the core of who I am. And time in nature is another beautiful respite. I know that you mentioned that as well. Going out in nature and just being hugged by the trees, and just being held in that space of life and energy, and that's being grounded within that. And when I have questions, I will mentally just hold that space of going, help me understand. And then my only job in that moment is to surrender and pay attention, because the answer always comes. It's just whether or not I catch the answer. So every time that I ask for help from spirit, from my guides, the answer always comes, but it is my job to pay attention and to accept the answer as it comes. And so for the listeners, I think it's equally important when you get what I refer to as a love nudge. It's probably more familiarly known as your intuition, or you get those little ideas that pop in your head. To pay attention to them, even if they seem like they're totally off in left field, pay attention to them, because our intuition and spirit and the divine spark within us, it's not some loud, clangy cacophony. It is quiet little whispers, quiet little nudges that we're invited to pay attention to. So even if it feels like you're making something up, pay attention to it. Hold space for that possibility in your mind. Be willing to lead with your heart instead of with your head. Open your heart to the truth behind what other people are saying. If you're in conflict with somebody, be able to see past their words and their actions and see their heart space, see their hurting heart that is creating those words of anger or pain, and being able to connect there. So to avoid judging people based on their words and their actions, and know that who they are as a person is still worthy of care and compassion.
Beautiful. Fabulous. And once again, I love the term love nudge. I think that really describes it, because often clients of mine and other people want to know, well, what's the difference? How do you know it's your intuition versus your mind? And I think your term love nudge is a perfect way. It's a perfect way of understanding whether it's coming from your intuition, because if it feels like love, it's most likely your intuition. If it sounds a little bit more critical and judgy, and then it probably is coming from your mind. So that's wonderful advice. It's like having that friend, that support you were talking about, only in invisible form, and it's available to all of us. So certainly, try to connect with a friend and support in other human beings. But whether you do or whether you don't, the invisible world is there for us to send us those love nudges, to help us along the way and learn to tap in. There are lots of people out there that can help you learn how to tap into your intuition. So thanks for that. And you have a book coming out later this summer. Why don't you tell the listeners a bit about it and your experience writing that book?
Sure. The book is called Fall in Love with the Whispers of Your Heart, a guide to transformation from the inside out. So it basically embraces everything that we've been talking about, but it's in book form, and it's that opportunity to explore. So there are 17 chapters within the book, covering all different things from forgiveness, fear, anger, prayer, passion, along those lines. And there are quotes, and I offer some personal thoughts around each of the quotes. And then there are reflection questions, and then a mantra to take with you, to be with. It's definitely not a sit down and read the book from cover to cover, while you're sitting on the beach. It's meant to be one of those that you trust your intuition. You open to that page, and that's exactly the page that you're invited to be with, and to take as much time with it as you need. And maybe you only have time to read the top quote for the day and go, okay, well, that's what I have for today, and be okay with that. Or allow yourself to be with it as fully as possible. There's spaces in there for journaling, to write down your thoughts, but it's your own personal resource to tap into the beauty of your heart and what's held in your heart, and to pay attention to those little whispers that speak to you, to help you feel okay, and to lean into feeling your feelings and exploring what makes you who you are.
Excellent. Sounds like a phenomenal book. And I love the way you've set it up so that it's more interactive and experiential. I truly believe that that's the greatest learning. There are lots of books out there with knowledge, but creating this book that becomes an experience is brilliant. And that's fantastic. Where can people get that book, Ann?
Well, you can go to my website, www.luxeternahealing.com/books, and that'll take you directly to the page, and you can order the book from there.
Excellent. And your website and all of your bio information and links will be in the description of the podcast. We are just about running out of time. Why don't you take a few minutes and tell people about your offerings and how they can get in touch with you? You've been a phenomenal guest, and you've shared some amazing insights, and hopefully the listeners will listen to what you have to say, just like your book, over and over again, because there's a lot of wisdom in it, and there's a lot of guidance, so that we don't have to experience those storms and near electrical fires that you did.
Thank you. Yes, my work with my clients really embraces that idea of awakening the curiosity to know more about who you are, to shift the perspective from being unworthy to being worthy, to guide that transformation from the inside out, to empower each person to know that they don't need to rely on people outside of them, that they have all of the answers within, and to go in that space. And again, the beauty of the work I do is to invite people and kind of be that coach, be that guide for them, with them, to walk with them. So to learn more about what I do, again, you can go to my webpage, luxeternahealing.com, and it would be an honor to walk with any and all of you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you've really helped our listeners, I think, understand more fully that journey of life. And I congratulate you for turning your beginnings that were rather unpleasant and uncomfortable into something so powerful, and being here as a healer at a time that the world needs us. So thank you for being a guest. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you all for listening in to the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. My name is Jeffrey Eisen. I'm a spiritual life coach, the channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. I invite you to check out my website, jeffreyeisen.com. There's lots of resources. You can tap into this podcast and many other podcasts and many other resources. Thank you once again, Anne, for being an amazing guest.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yes, excellent. Love and light to all of you. Thank you for listening.